The Tennessee Titans finished the 2024 season with a 3-14 record and missed the playoffs for the third straight year. And in the 51 games they've played since the start of the 2022 season, this team has a record of just 16-35 and has had countless embarrassing moments over the past few years. The one everyone knows about, of course, is trading A.J. Brown to the Eagles, much to the disappointment of then head coach Mike Vrabel, and we've seen firsthand how that turned out. But it wasn't just one bad trade one time. It's been a collective sequence of events that have really sent this franchise downhill from a team that was coming off of 3 straight postseason appearances, including a trip to the conference championship game in 2019 and being the number 1 seed in the 2021 playoffs. But unlike normal teams that bottom out over the course of a couple of years, the Tennessee Titans are in a bit of a dilemma. They have the number 1 pick in the 2025 draft, and a lot of people, myself included, think the pick will be used on a quarterback. But they're in a bit of a dilemma for a couple of reasons, and it starts at the top of the organization. And in today's video, we're going to break down how we got here, what the plan should be moving forward, and what they can do to get back to winning games consistently. And there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by going back to the 2022 season because that's when things really started to go downhill. Obviously, everyone knows about the A.J. Brown and Treylon Burks selection, and the Titans proved firsthand just how difficult it is to try and do what the Vikings did with Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson, and basically replace a 1,000-yard receiver with another 1,000-yard receiver. But there's 2 things that went in the Vikings' favor that ultimately did not go in the Titans' favor. They had the team selecting directly in front of them have an all-time draft blunder as the Eagles took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, and the second part was they got lucky with a mid to late first-round pick, becoming one of the best receivers over the past 20 years. Nobody thought Jefferson would be this good, even despite the clowning the Eagles received when they made the pick at the time. But former general manager John Robinson was fired during the 2022 season, not after, in which they went 7-10, but during, and he was fired after the Eagles beat the Titans 35-10 in Week 13, and for anyone who may not remember that game, that was the A.J. Brown first game against the Titans game. He had 8 receptions for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns, and even at a point, had a 40-yard touchdown called back, only to score a 40-yard touchdown on the very next play. And obviously that's embarrassing at the time, as you got beat by 25 points on the road, but this was a 7-5 football team that had a multiple game lead in the division. Remember, the 2022 Jags do not happen without a Titans collapse, and for reference, the Jags were 4-8 when John Robinson was fired. So for the Titans to fire John Robinson at the time after an embarrassing loss was, to me, a bit of an overreaction, and not only that, but what we did not know at the time was this would foreshadow a lot of how the Titans' next couple of years would play out. There is belief that when Mike Vrabel was inducted into the Patriots Ring of Honor, which was in Week 8 of 2023, coincidentally when the Titans had a bye week, that during his speech he said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Enjoy what you have here in New England because it's not like this everywhere, so do not take it for granted." And a lot of people think that Titans owner Amy Adams Strunk took that as a direct shot at the Titans organization, and that Mike Vrabel was referring to them during his speech. I'm not here to say whether it was or was not a shot at the Titans organization, but Mike Vrabel was fired less than 3 months after that speech, and ultimately after the Titans finished the 2023 season with a 6-11 record. Current head coach Brian Callahan was hired in January of 2024 and is still the current Titans coach. Now, former general manager Ran Carthon was fired on January 7th earlier this year. Going through 2 GMs and 2 coaches in a span of a little over 2 years is not good, and it's a terrible precedent to set for the future of your franchise, and this is the biggest reason why the Titans have a dilemma on their hands. It is fair to say the Titans underachieved this past year as a 3-win team, and having the number 1 pick is terrible for any franchise, but 2024 was always going to be the answer of whether or not Will Levis was going to be the Titans franchise quarterback. And not only that, but in terms of bringing in talent and in terms of bringing in guys to play for the Titans, I think Ran Carthon did a really good job in terms of acquiring talent. He brought in guys like J.C. Latham and T'Vondre Sweat in the first 2 rounds of the 2024 draft, and he traded for L'Jarius Sneed, who unfortunately didn't work out in year 1, and also brought in Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd in free agency to try and improve a receiving room that desperately needed it from where where they were in 2023. I would argue it would be more on Brian Callahan than Rand Carthon for the team not performing better than they did in 2024, and I also think there's a reason they had 132 penalties this year, which was tied for second in the entire league. I personally thought that if you were going to fire one of Brian Callahan or Rand Carthon, that you probably should have went ahead and fired both and had a clean slate. And we'll get more into Brian Callahan specifically in a minute, but you don't accidentally finish second in the entire NFL in penalties and look undisciplined week after week after week. And I also think there's a lot against Brian Callahan in terms of how prepared the Tennessee Titans were on a game-by-game basis in 2024, which, yes, you can argue the Titans underperformed in 2024, as 3-14 is not acceptable for any franchise. But with the team underperforming, that is not a Rand Carthon problem. That is a Brian Callahan problem for not game planning the way that he should have throughout the week and having the team ready to play the way that he should have throughout the week. And I think that we're in a situation now with the Titans that is eerily similar to what we have in Chicago with the Bears, where they fired Matt Eberflus, and that was a rightful decision, by the way, as that Thanksgiving game against the Lions was an absolute disaster. But now they're entering year 4 with Ryan Poles, who lifetime has a record of just 15-36 as the Bears GM, and who once infamously said that we are taking the North over and we're not giving it back. I am a big proponent of having the head coach and the GM line together, because when a head coach and GM aren't on the same page, I think that causes a lot of dysfunction within the organization, not just from the head coach or the general manager, but ultimately from the top down. Because if one isn't doing their job, then there's a real chance they are either coaching or making moves for their job, and that's not a good page to be on in the organization if you have somebody looking out for job preservation while somebody wants to prepare and to continue to rebuild for tomorrow. And we've seen that with the Bears now with 3 straight quarterbacks, whether it was Mitch, whether it was Justin Fields, or now Caleb Williams, and the future is still out for Caleb Williams, and I do think he was a better prospect than both Mitch and Justin coming out of USC last year, and ultimately I think he has a better situation than Mitch or Justin ever had, but there was a lot of dysfunction within the organization to begin with that they should never have been in the situation they're in now. And obviously Nashville is not the same media size or the same market size or metropolitan area size that a Chicago or a New York is, so they don't receive the publicity that a Chicago Bears or New York Giants or Jets do, but I really think the Titans are a dysfunctional organization, and I think it really started back in 2022. Going through multiple general managers and multiple head coaches in a couple of years span is not a good look no matter how you slice it. And I go back to John Robinson being fired after a 35-10 loss back in 2022. Did it stink at that point in time? Yes, but you have to go through a little bit of adversity. I mean, there's never been a 19-0 or a 20-0 team, and there's not going to be one this year. Every organization loses games, and to make an emotional decision and fire him after A.J. Brown had a good game against your team really was the domino effect into where we are today, and I think the Titans are a really, really dysfunctional organization, and there's been a lot of decisions that have been made over the past few years that really could have been prevented and prevented them from having the number 1 pick in the 2025 draft and going through multiple GMs and multiple head coaches. And one thing I don't think is being talked about, in full transparency, I do think Cam Ward will be the number 1 pick in the 2025 draft. That part is being talked about. But the part that's not being talked about is, what if he struggles? Because not every quarterback class in the next couple of years is going to do what the 2024 class did. The 6th quarterback in the class is not going to have 34 total touchdowns every year. The 2nd quarterback taken is not going to win a playoff game every year. Caleb Williams, despite the struggles he had, still had a solid rookie season statistically, yet only won 5 games. So what if Cam Ward comes right out of the gate and goes 0-4, 0-5, and Brian Callahan's record falls to 3-18 or 3-19 lifetime? And what if the Titans ownership groups decides to make another rash decision and fire Brian Callahan 5 games into Cam Ward's career? I think there is a potential recipe for disaster for Cam Ward because of the dysfunction that's taken place within this organization over the past couple of years. Now, I know we've expressed a lot of concern about the Titans' ownership and organization with the way things are run, but I think there's something else that's equally concerning for the Titans entering 2025, and it's that the Titans went 1-5 in the AFC South in 2024. And not only did they go 1-5, but there's a lot of context around those losses that I think honestly makes the losses look a lot worse than what they even were at the time. Specifically, the last couple of losses. They were 3-9 entering the Week 14 Jags game, and obviously the season was over at that point, as even if they won out, the best they could have hoped for was an 8-9 record, and we've had the discussion before about tanking, and teams don't tank because you can't honestly ask a grown man to go out there and stink at his job with money on the line and with his family's future on the line, and you get the point. But they lost 10-6 to the Mac Jones-led Jags, and Mac Jones played like you would expect him to play in a game that ended with a score of 10-6. He threw 2 interceptions and had a passer rating of less than 70, and this was all around a very ugly game. And why I think the Titans are in a dilemma is this wasn't a particularly tough game to win. All you had to do was put up 11 points at home against a Mac Jones-led Jags team in a game, by the way, in which you won the turnover battle 2-0 and actually had less penalties than their opponent. We mentioned earlier that the Titans were tied for being the second most penalized team in 2024, which is certainly noteworthy, but losing this game in particular on your home field was inexcusable. They lost to the Bengals the following week with a score of 37-27, and Will Levis had 4 incompletions on the day before getting benched, 3 of which were interceptions, and anytime you have a quarterback throw 3 picks, including a pick 6, I'm not going to weigh that loss much into why I think the Titans have a problem, especially in a game where they committed 6 turnovers offensively, and in a game where they were playing a much better team in the Bengals. Heading into 2024, without what we know now, 9 out of 10 people would have picked the Bengals to win that game regardless. But the following week against the Colts, when Tennessee entered the game with a 3-11 record, was a game I came away disappointed from both sides. The Titans went up 7-0, then Indy scored 38 unanswered to make it 38-7, then Tennessee clawed back enough to make the final score look respectable as they lost 38-30. I was disappointed in Tennessee allowing 335 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground, and I was also disappointed in the Colts allowing as many garbage time points as they did, and there's a reason Gus Bradley is no longer their defensive coordinator. But the one constant that applies with the Titans down the stretch of the 2024 season was consistently underperforming, and if you go 1-5 in a division where you played Mac Jones, a 39-year-old Joe Flacco, and Anthony Richardson for 4 of your division games, that's a problem. And honestly, you can even toss in Davis Mills in there too, as they played most of the Texans' backups in Week 18, as CJ Stroud only threw 6 passes, and Joe Mixon only ran the ball 5 times, as it was the Davis Mills and Dameon Pierce show. Funnily enough, one of the Titans' 3 wins in 2024 was over the Texans in a game where they put up 32 points and looked like a competent NFL team. But consistently not being prepared and not playing to the level of other AFC South teams that did not make the playoffs in 2024, and one in particular swept you with a backup quarterback, is extremely worrisome for the Titans as they move on to 2025. And this is the main reason why, if you were going to move on from Ran Carthon, which again I disagree with and I think it was the wrong decision, then I think the other move should have been to move on from Brian Callahan too. I think the one big thing that also has to be remembered for the future of this franchise and for the sake of Brian Callahan's job is the question of how much can this team truly improve in one offseason? Because what has to be remembered is teams that go from 3 or 4 wins to 10 or 11 to make the playoffs, and even like the Texans like we saw from 2022 to 2023 and beating the Browns in a wildcard playoff game, teams like that are the exception rather than the standard. And the Titans have the 11th most cap space right now at around $44 million. They can free up $11 million by releasing Harold Landry and free up another $7.5 by releasing linebacker Kenneth Murray. So if they release those guys, they can be around $61 million. If they were to sign T. Higgins in free agency, and we're just playing a hypothetical here, I don't think they will, but if they were to sign T. Higgins, does T have this team go from 3-14 to 9-8, potentially making a wild card, maybe even winning the division in the AFC South and winning a playoff game, along with the progression of then rookie quarterback Cam Ward and the progression of J.C. Latham on the left side of the offensive line, and you get the point? I don't think so, and I think there's going to have to be a lot of patience required from Titans ownership, which is not something we've seen over the past few years, or the fact that they're going to have to come to the realization that Brian Callahan is not the guy for the job if it comes to that at the end of the 2025 season. I think the Titans' future can go one of 2 ways. They look at the past couple of years in terms of what not to do and vow to never have this type of couple of season span again, or 2, continue to what they're doing doing and then hopefully hire a head coach next year and think that he may be the guy to work with Cam Ward and effectively waste what will be year one of Cam Ward's development and a couple of guys' primes like Jeffrey Simmons for reference and Roger McCreary as well. And I don't want the Titans to be in that situation, because now that they have the number 1 overall pick, they have a chance to make this situation right, in a situation that should have never came to this over the past few years. We recently did a video on the Steelers, and within that video we broke down how difficult it is to go from a good team to a truly great or elite team when you're playing the Josh Allens, the Lamars, the Mahomes, and the Burrows of the world regularly, and how difficult it is just to get to a single Super Bowl. The Titans need to continuously improve their roster, and that starts with bringing in Cam Ward and hopefully getting the GM right and having a little bit of patience from ownership, which certainly has not been there over the past few years. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 45% of people watching are subscribed, and we're trying to get 200K by the NFL draft. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.